Thank you. It's so good to see some people here. The rest of the world thanks you for caring about them. So I'd like to open with a quick poll. How many of you are already conducting international SEO? All right, decent amount of people. Okay, that was just a warm-up. Now please stand up. You actually have to stand. I can't advance the slide until everyone's standing. If you have a laptop, the laptop can stand too. Almost everyone, but still, slides don't go forward. Thank you for participating. Okay, if you've traveled overseas in the last 5 years, you can sit down. Great. If you bought a product that was made overseas, like a Toyota, Samsung, LG, Mercedes, use Skype, anything made overseas, Skype is Estonian, talk to someone overseas. Yeah? Yes, you can sit down. So all of you have been the recipients of international SEO. So you know a little bit about who you are. And for the rest of this presentation, I want you to think of yourselves as the recipients of international SEO and not as marketers. I think I lost my mic. Okay. Think of yourselves as the kind of people that are receiving the marketing and learning something about another country as you went, if you traveled overseas or bought another product, you searched for it and you used international SEO. It's not that you created international SEO, you received international SEO. So now that I know who you are, here's who I am. So I am a director of growth at SurveyMonkey. One of the things I lead is I lead SEO. I've spent about a decade leading international SEO, and I only speak English. So I've been able to optimize SurveyMonkey's site and multiple other sites in many languages, and I can't speak any of those languages. And that's what I'm going to share with you today. I'm going to share those experiences on how I was able to do that by just doing SEO and not learning another language and not actually working with people that did the SEO for me without using an agency or any hands-on translator. I actually took the SEO thing the international thing a little bit too far, and I moved overseas with SurveyMonkey, and I led marketing in Singapore for a couple of years. I've been privileged to speak at many conferences around the world on topics of international SEO and growth marketing, and I've also been able to write for many different blogs, and some of that I'll reference today. Now, I always like to have this picture up when I present because this picture is of me with a toilet. And this picture was one of my most interesting content marketing experiences, and it was when I was in Asia. So when I was in Asia, I had the chance to visit a company called Couscous. Couscous is sort of like Reddit and Quora combined, and it's the largest content site in Southeast Asia. They get 600 million visits a month, completely in Indonesian. Their mascot is a toilet because Couscous sounds like toilet in Indonesian. And when I went to their office, they insist that all visitors to the office take a picture after signing the toilet. So there's a huge world out there, and it's not really the narrow focus that we have. So I always like to have this picture of me when I talk about these topics. So I'm going to do something a little bit risky for a speaker. I'm going to guarantee you that by the end of this presentation, you will know how to 10x your content or 10x your traffic with international SEO. And if you don't, I will give you your time back. My presentation is about 30 minutes. If you don't know how to do that, I will give you 30 minutes on the phone and show you how to do exactly that. So you can obviously Google me. Hopefully everyone is smart enough to use Google, and you can find out how to contact me. My Twitter handle is below. But please stay until the end if you want to take me up on this guarantee when I have my email address, and I will share that with you. And if you want, you actually have to tell me what you didn't learn, and then I will give you 30 minutes and teach you how to grow your traffic with international SEO. So let's begin with explaining why we need to care about international. So who is the greatest football team in 2018? Now, most of you should remember, earlier this year, the Philadelphia Eagles won the Super Bowl. 100 million people watched them, 700,000 people came out to their parade and declared them the world champions. The French national team would beg to differ. They think that they are the world champions of football. Now, if you think that me pointing out that there's a cultural difference between the way Americans play sports and call ourselves world champions and the rest of the world plays sports and calls themselves world champions when they actually play the world, that's child's play. That's not the point I intend to make. The point I wanted to make is that 3.4 billion people watched a game, at least a game of the World Cup, and over 1 million people turned out for the French parade. So if you're focused only on one little audience, like our National Football League, and missing out on the rest of the world, 3.4 billion people is just a little bit bigger. And continuing on this theme of statistics, so when the internet was first created, it started in the United States. A large percentage of the internet population was in the United States. Now, our 280 million internet users are only about 4% of the internet users around the world. China has more internet users than we have people. So again, if you're focused only in the United States, or maybe if you're in Canada and combine that with the United States, you're focusing only on such a small part of the world population. Now, if you think that by having your content in English, you're still hitting the rest of the world, only 12% of the world speaks and understands English as at least a first or second language. Only 6% speak it as a first language. All those people that don't speak it as a first language, they're certainly not searching in English. They're searching in their own language. So if you are focused only on English, you're missing out on at least 90% of the rest of the world. Now, I just recently conducted a survey to understand a little bit more of search, and that survey will be published soon. The survey was run at the end of all surveys that were taken on SurveyMonkey, got over 6,000 responses. Interesting thing worth calling out here is that 97% of people use search every single day. So if you're thinking about going global, SEO and search is the easiest way and cheapest way to go global. You don't need to hire a big agency in another country. You don't need to hire a sales team. You don't even need to launch paid campaigns. You just need to make the content you already have and the products you already have available to a global audience. 1.2 trillion searches are conducted every year, and that number continues to grow. And only 3% of searches on those 1.2 trillion searches go to an AdWords ad. So 97% of searches are going organic. Organic is where you want to be, and it is the absolute cheapest way for you to go global. So your question now is probably, does SEO, international SEO, matter for you? And let's look at that. So let's talk about the scenario of what happens with international SEO and when you're not doing international SEO. So imagine for a second that you're looking for the most perfect thing, something you've been seeking for a really, really long time. Say it's an article of clothing. It's just that one shirt you've always wanted. You finally find where it's being sold. You go to that store. You wait in line. You get to the front of the line after waiting a really long time. And the cashier doesn't want to accept your credit card. For whatever reason, they only accept Bitcoin, and you don't have Bitcoin, and there's nowhere else for you to get what you're looking for. This is exactly what we are doing to our international customers when we are not targeting them, and we are not accepting their currency or not having our content in their languages. And if you don't believe me, have a look at your own Google Search Console. So hopefully you've all registered with Google and you have access to your search data. It used to be called Google Webmaster Tools, now called Google Search Console. So look at your Google Search Console, and you should see outliers of countries that are sending traffic to you and you had no idea, with decent click-through rates, possibly even better than your home country. These are people that are finding you naturally online, and more than likely, they have a pretty poor experience. They are unable to convert for whatever reason. You don't accept their credit card, they don't understand your conversion call to action, they don't understand your content. If you don't believe me, and I hope you're all doing this right now, look at your Google Analytics, look at however you track your traffic, and look at the international traffic you're getting and see if it converts at the same rate as your domestic traffic, wherever your domestic market is. And if you are looking at this right now and you don't see what I see, I won't be offended if you get up and walk out. But if you don't get up and walk out, then this presentation is for you. So now I'm going to walk you through on how we can do international SEO without doing it in a really scary way, without actually opening up a sales office, without needing to hire translators, without doing anything really, really expensive. So first thing you don't need to do is you don't need to start another website if you don't have to. SurveyMonkey has websites in other countries, but we have the scale to do that. If you don't have the scale to do that, there's absolutely no need to go and build other domains. You don't need to launch microsites. You can if you want to. You don't need to worry about hreflang. If you're familiar with that, that's where you tell Google you have other content. I'm going to walk you through how to do this just from a content perspective. No technical SEO expertise needed. Here's an eye chart. I'm not going to walk you through this entire thing, so if you want it, take a picture of it. I don't recommend that you do a CCTLD, which is a country code top-level domain like .co.uk. If you Google whether to do country code top-level domain versus a subdomain or subdirectory, unfortunately, I wrote too much content and recommended that you do that, use a country code top-level domain. I don't recommend it anymore. Google's moving away from URLs. Users are moving away from URLs. It's absolutely not necessary. So you have this picture. This is what I recommend, and you can ask me afterwards. So the truth is, and this is all you need to know about international SEO is really just SEO. You're doing the exact same things from a technical perspective, from a linking perspective, from every single thing you're doing exactly the same as you do domestically, obviously with the little challenge that it's in another language and another culture. So as we should all know, search is incredibly personal. Google recently announced that they don't personalize search results as much anymore, which is they are not going to give you results that are targeted to you. But that's a little bit of a misnomer because they are personalizing Google Suggest. So you conduct a query. The query after that is actually personalized to whatever you just searched. So here's an example. I looked at flights to San Diego. My next result, I just typed the word hotel, and suddenly they're giving me San Diego results. Same goes with things to do in Barcelona. I don't even write anything about Barcelona. I just start writing December, and immediately they're December weather in Barcelona. They're doing the exact same thing for people all over the world, regardless of language, regardless of location. Here's an example from Google Trends. Google actually knows the data that they have in Google Trends. So the entire country looks for Coke. There are 2 little states there that care about Pepsi. Look at this in the rest of the world. The same thing happens. If someone is searching soda or bubbly water or bubbly sugary drink, they're going to get whatever Google thinks is most relevant for that culture. And then I did another one here on Apple versus Samsung, and you see the richer countries are searching Apple. So when you look for smartphones, Google is going to serve up what they're most likely to want to click on. So essentially, international is really just a persona. It's a different kind of persona. Personas can be a dirty buzzword when used incorrectly, but the same way you create personas for your domestic markets, Bob does this, Tracy is this age, this kind of shopper. We can do the exact same thing for international. You can even make them less defined. You can say, French people go to sleep later. The UK eats a bigger lunch. When you're marketing to them, it's very important that you know those kinds of things. One thing I learned by living overseas is not everyone in the world has credit cards. Cash is very popular. It's very difficult to get a credit card, and even if you have a credit card, you may not be able to use your credit card for foreign purchases. There's no pay 3% option. So if you're marketing to another country and you're talking about credit cards, they may have no idea what you're talking about. Excuse me. So you should know your customers. Know what search engines they're using. Know what languages they speak. Know how they're connecting to the internet. Do they have fast broadband, or are they mostly using mobile? That kind of knowledge should define how you're marketing to them and the kinds of content you're creating. You can't use rich images if they're using small devices with slow internet connections. Like I just said before, your payment systems. You have to be able to accept payments from the countries you're targeting. This will be the biggest blocker. You may want to use something like PayPal or incorporate with Stripe. On an international market, you want to make sure that they can actually pay you when they want to. And finally, if you're selling something, you have to be able to deliver the product to them. If you don't have a shipping arrangement, find another way that you can get your product to that country. Voice is big. Voice is changing the kinds of personas we have because now we get much richer data about people. People are talking to their voice assistants like they're their friends. So now those personas are expanding. There's not much you need to do here other than know that the keyword landscape for voice will be even bigger. Just like any marketing, nuance is really, really important. Little things will turn your audience off. And when I was in Asia, I had a field day of taking pictures like this. This is not the kind of legal office I want to walk into. If you're translating your content, make sure you're not committing this sort of faux pas. Make sure that your content is not going to literally scare them away because you're going to kill them. The same goes with images. The kinds of images you use should be relevant and not indicate to your customers and your users that your brand is obsolete by putting a Game Boy on your images when you're trying to tell them what not to do. The images project an image, no pun intended, of your brand. Use those right images. So now we understand why we need to do international SEO and the basics of what international SEO is, and now I'm going to talk to you about how to actually go ahead and do this. First thing you need to know is SEO for international is SEO like it was 10 years ago. All the AI, intent matching, query understanding, complicated things you need to do for domestic SEO do not apply when it comes to international. When Google has the option of funding 100 engineers to work on English or 100 engineers to work on German, it just makes more sense to use them in English. So they'll put engineers on figuring out those AI questions in English and maybe sort of figure it out in other languages. So when it comes to international, you just need to follow the basics. Make sure your domain matches keywords. Make sure your pages are structured correctly. Make sure you're using the keywords correctly. That's what we're going to talk about. Keywords are the most important thing you need for international SEO. The keywords have to match what the user is searching. If the keywords don't match, it doesn't matter whether it's a synonym, doesn't matter whether it's a plural, it doesn't matter whether it's a related keyword. The keyword that the user is searching is the most important. That's the keyword you use on the page. And here's this example of Google resourcing international the same way they resource domestic. So when I was in Singapore and my son was born, I was looking for a baby bassinet. All of my results were results of stores I could not actually buy from while I was in Singapore. They did not ship to Singapore. Some of those websites didn't even allow me to log in from Singapore. When I put that modifier on of baby bassinet price Singapore, that's when Google started showing me the results they didn't want to show to begin with. And the reason for this is they didn't think they were high quality enough. So they showed me the basic generic results that anybody in the US might see, but not the results that I should have seen. This is a huge area of opportunity for you because if you're focused on a country, if you're in English, you're going to have many, many competitors. If you're in another country, you're not going to have nearly as many competitors. Focus on international SEO, huge area of opportunity, so much less content. Here's another example for SurveyMonkey. German is a really, really complicated language to do international SEO for. Because in German, the way Germans spell words is they can put spaces in between two words. They can concatenate them, so just make them one long word, or they can put a dash in between them. Now, if you've ever tried doing this in English, being really lazy, where you just write the phrase out without putting a space in it, you know Google's going to do a did you mean, or just correct it for you. Same goes with a dash. In German, Google is not sure what you mean when you do that, so they actually take every string, the phrase you've exactly searched, and match that exact string. Same applies for any Scandinavian language. So it's critical that you use the exact keyword, spacing, phrasing, and even accents that a user would search, because you can't rely on Google doing a did you mean and matching it. In this case, they did a little bit of did you mean, that's because I searched it in English, but the results are completely different. Whereas in English, if you search this, they would just give the exact same results because there's a typo, you meant something else, doesn't matter whether you put the typo in and spelled it correctly, you're getting the exact same results. So the keywords must match the exact same thing that users will search. Now let's talk about how to get those exact keywords. And here's where you don't need to speak another language to get those keywords. You're going to need to use a translation tool, Google Translate, Babelfish, because you don't speak the language. But let's start with finding other keywords people might have used. So Wikipedia is my favorite place to start. So the first thing you want to do is figure out what that primary keyword is, put it into Wikipedia. Now remember, Wikipedia is all user generated. So all the cross links in Wikipedia will also be user generated. So people are creating those relations between the one keyword you searched and the other keywords that are cross-links, things you might want to learn. Collect all those keywords and put them in Google Translate and see which of those are relevant. If these keywords and if these cross-links survive the Wikipedia editors, they're very likely the right word that people are searching. And these are the kind of words that you might want to consider putting in your pages. One of my favorite search tools is Ahrefs. You could also use any other search tool like SEMrush or Searchmetrics. Put in your competitor and look at the keywords that they're bidding on. They're paid keywords. So most search tools will do this for you. If your competitor, obviously this has to be your competitor in that country. If you're looking at your domestic competitor that's also in that country, it's just the blind leading the blind. But look at your competitor in that country. Look at the keywords they're bidding on. Again, these are good ideas for things you might want to consider putting in your SEO content. If they're willing to spend money, it's probably relevant and related to what you're doing. Might as well put it in your content. See if it's a good option for search traffic. You can also look up your competitors in AdWords. So put in your competitor's domain into the AdWords keyword planner, and you can target the country and target the language, and see the kinds of keywords Google's suggesting you would bid on if that was your site. Again, pulling all of Google's database, these are the kinds of keywords that they feel are relevant to that site. My favorite keyword suggest tool is called keywordtool.io. So take your primary keyword, put that into keywordtool.io, and see what kinds of keywords are suggested by the keyword tool. Again, those are words that may be relevant for you. Put those into Google Translate. By this time, you should have a huge collection of potential keywords. You don't need to know anything about that language. You don't need to know anything about the personas. All you have is a bunch of keywords that are very likely need to be used on your page. This is one that I like to use, and I have the benefit of using because I work for a survey platform. But you can create a survey. So I don't know if you can see my questions here, but they're sort of grayed out. But I asked users, what do you think of about this product? What would you call this product? You can even ask them how much they would pay for that product. So you're surveying into a particular market, asking for users to just freely give you ideas on what they would call something or how they would search for something. You can even ask them which Google result they'd most likely click on. If you have an email list for that country, send that survey out to the email list. You can put that survey on Twitter or Facebook and buy an audience specifically in that country. Ideally, your survey should be translated if you want the best responses, but it doesn't have to be as long as people understand English. And then we also have SurveyMonkey Audience, where you can send that survey out to, and you can get responses from that country. So we're getting our users to tell us what we need to call things, what keywords need to be on our content, and you can even ask them for what kind of content they'd want to see. So this is a completely new market for you. Might as well tap into the minds of users. And finally, this is the most important thing. You can go on Craigslist and you can hire a natural speaker. So when you're looking for someone that can help you out with your translations and help you out with your keywords, this should be someone that was born in that country and grew up speaking that language. You don't want to find someone that was a second-generation speaker, learned how to speak the language in college, maybe grew up in a home that spoke that language. You want someone that knows the right slang. Again, going back to German, one of the things I've learned is that while most people in the world obviously don't say the word cell phone, they call it mobile phone or different things like that. In German, they call it handy, because that's the slang word for the phone you put in your hand. So now if you're targeting the word mobile phone, yes, they'll understand it, but they're not searching for mobile phone. So you want to have someone that really understands that culture, help you out with, hey, what would you call this and what are the keywords you should use around this? So now that we have our keywords, we have our concept of how we should be doing SEO, let's talk about how we're going to start making money off this. So I mentioned earlier, you don't need to make a microsite. You don't need to make an actual website. If you want to, and if you have enough of a base and you have enough budget, go right ahead. It's just a little bit more complicated because now you have to support that. But you can actually make landing pages. So you have your core site in English, whatever your language is on your site. Why not make a landing page and just hang it off the rest of your site? You can put something in the nav which says German or Spanish, French, or you can just put it in your sitemap. As long as Google can find this page, you have your translated page, your content is using all the keywords you want, people are searching for it, and guess who's going to find it? Only the people in that language. It's not going to be people who speak English are going to accidentally find out a page you create in another language and wonder what you're talking about. So now you create this great page, and all you're doing is bringing in organic traffic. Now I've done this. The country I did it in the most successfully was in Indonesia. SurveyMonkey doesn't service Indonesia. We accept Indonesian currency, and we don't have Indonesian translations in our product. What I did was I created Indonesian content landing pages. Only Indonesians find that because only Indonesians search Indonesian in Google. No one else will. And the page had thousands of % increases in conversion rates in Indonesia. Now I have to admit, it was a complete bait and switch. When users clicked on the call to action or the pricing, they landed in English. Jarring experience. However, top of funnel, we got so much more traffic coming in, but they landed on the pricing page. If they didn't speak English, they weren't going to be a customer anyways. We don't have our product translated into Indonesian. If they did speak English, after that moment of what happened to my Indonesian, they can now convert. If you have enough content, you can create dynamic content on your page related to a culture or a translation. The page itself should not change. So you shouldn't be geo-detecting users and switch them over to like a /UK or a /DE or /FR, because then you're going to confuse Google, potentially end up with duplicate content. But if you have personalized content for a specific culture or country, put it there. Geo-detect it, change something on the page, make it more friendly for that country, for the country's users coming in. You might as well help them convert a little bit better. You have your keywords, use them. Same goes with pricing. So your pricing page can change, but it should change dynamically. You shouldn't be redirecting users to a new pricing page because now you're going to confuse users. What currency should I pay in? Maybe your price is cheaper in dollars than they are in euros. Geo-detect the users, show them prices for their country if you want them to pay in that currency. If you can't accept currency in that country, again, maybe you want to work with PayPal, or just make it easier for them to pay you. Remember, not everyone has a credit card or the ability to pay you internationally. One of the things I learned by working with international customers is that most of you are here on an expense account. You don't have to ask your boss's permission every time you're going to buy a Coke or buy lunch. In other countries and in other cultures, that's not the case. They get a specific defined budget. If they want to buy software, they have to get it approved. They need to bring it to the CFO. So don't assume that everyone can immediately convert with a credit card. Provide an invoicing option. Provide a way for them to get on the phone and get approvals if they need it. Again, you don't want to shut the door to those international customers. So to summarize, international is huge. If you're not focusing on 90% of the rest of the world and only focusing on less than 10%, then you're missing out on the vast potential of your market. By moving to the rest of the world, you can easily 10x your growth. If you need international SEO, that's completely up to your metrics. I think that everyone could potentially benefit from international SEO. At this conference, I saw a lot of people from banks, from hospitals, from health insurers. There's international traffic coming to all this content. If you have a bank and you can't service international customers, maybe you have an affiliated bank in another country. There's no reason that you should be saying, sorry, we don't service your country. Send that traffic somewhere, benefit from it. Maybe a bank in another country or financial institution in another country has US traffic and they can send that traffic to you. Same goes with health. There's no reason that the NHS can rank on content for American customers. If there's NHS in the UK. If they're ranking, you can rank. You have competitors. If you're not winning the search results, your competitors are winning the search results. The way you're going to win at SEO is by understanding your core users, by creating these personas for who your international users are. It's not by just putting your content up. Create content and good experiences for these users and understand their personas. And the best way to really tap into these personas is by using the keywords that they're going to be searching. And this is going to get a lot harder with voice search, but use those words, understand the words they're searching, and try to learn exactly how they'll search and create content that matches exactly what they're looking for. And finally, now that you know how to create all this content with the exact keywords, turn it into content. Make it available pages on your site. So really, international SEO is basic SEO. From a technical standpoint, you don't need to do anything differently at all. It's the same as domestic SEO, minus that little challenge of a language you don't understand. And hopefully by what I've shown you, you can overcome that and you can learn how to do SEO in another language you don't know. And thanks for sitting through this. Here's my email address. If I have not shown you how to 10x your traffic, you can come over to me, you can email me, and I will give you those 30 minutes. Any questions?
Thank you, Eli.
Thank you. How do you account for like all of the different dialects in a country? You know, China has many different dialects. How do you account for those?
You actually have to account for it. So if you're focused on one dialect, you need content for that dialect. Spelling dialects is critical. So one of the mistakes most people make when it comes to international is they do a translation for a language and they call it a day. So they're like, we've got Spanish, and they've lumped in all of Latin America, and they've lumped in Spain, and they call it a day. But really, there's nuances that are different between every country in Latin America, and the way they're going to search or name products is different. Same goes with Portuguese. Yes, there are only a couple countries that speak Portuguese, but the nuances between those countries are vast. So one of the things that we did at SurveyMonkey is we tried to kind of toe the line and have this hybrid approach, but that hybrid approach doesn't work. So in Portuguese, there's 3 ways to say survey. And one of the ways is by using this word that in Brazil means police investigation. Another way is by, in Portugal, you're just saying search. So that's the word that Google uses when you click search. We use that could be a word for survey. And then there's another word called questionario, which is this hybrid that no one searches. So you can't use the hybrid. If you're focused on Brazil, you need to use the Brazilian words. If you're focused on Portugal, you need the Portuguese words. Focused on Mozambique, you have to use the words they use there. So you must account for dialects and must account for spelling.
Thanks. So you talked about dynamic content and not changing the URLs. How does that work with something like a blog post where the URL is going to be in English and those keywords are going to appear in there? Is that a situation where you would want to have a separate actual page for that on your site?
Dynamic would be more relevant if it's British or Canadian and you have something a little bit different. So you can drop a banner or put some content on top of the blog post they're going to understand. Like, you know, we now ship to Canada, something like that. I wouldn't take that blog post and create a /CA, have the exact same blog post, and now have that banner on it. So if you know you can do something different for Canada or the UK, that's where you want to be dynamic. When it comes to other languages, there's no harm. There's no duplicate content there. Are you all experts now?
I'll go twice. You said you can find some of these people on Craigslist who can interpret for you. Do you have a vetting process for them? Like, you know, how do you know who's good and who's not?
So if they have just come from that country, that's good enough. So if you're concerned about whether the quality of what they're telling you is, and again, they don't need a degree or anything in this, they just need to be a person from that country, just get 2 of them and see if it lines up. It should be fairly cheap. You're just saying, hey, can you be my buddy and tell me how people would say this, or how would you write this if I asked you? Something like that.
I get to ask a question, if that's okay. So, Eli, we're an international company as well, and we're constantly dealing with...
We're a German company.
We're a German company, constantly dealing with the differences in language, sometimes slang between the US and the UK. But I think I'm really curious about sourcing content, especially in terms of originating content. So, because we get something called German English, which is when you start with German, it becomes even more stilted in English, no matter how hard you try. What do you recommend? Do you recommend actually originating the content in the native language, or are you starting with English and translating?
So the process I recommend is actually called transcreation. So you're not taking the content and translating it. You're taking the content and using it as a base for a new language and saying, how would you write this in your own language? And you have to remove all the cultural references. So Independence Day is not in July if you're putting it in a piece of content you want global. Maybe bachelor parties aren't a thing in the country you're putting in. So sort of scrub those things out and then write it natively. I know like the way we write content might be like 3 sentences a paragraph. Maybe in German it's 15 sentences. So you just want to structure it differently and use the right words.
Are there any countries that you recommend starting with when you're trying to decide what country or language to focus on?
Your data should be your guide. So look in your whatever you have at Google Analytics or Omniture, and if there is a country that's just sending a lot of traffic to you and you're not doing anything with, that's where you would start first.
Does what you said about international SEO apply to China, which has a much more developed...
To where?
To China, which has a much more developed digital ecosystem?
It absolutely applies to China, but China is significantly more complicated. So in China, the primary search engine is Baidu, and Baidu doesn't use the same algorithm that Google does. They actually have more of a pay-to-play element. So if you pay, you can rank higher. Baidu also will not allow you to rank unless your content's hosted in China, because they have the Great Firewall, and Baidu is responsible for the kind of content that appears. So if you're not hosted in China, they don't want to accept responsibility. So it's more complicated, but the same nuances would apply as far as just on Google, like keyword matching, character matching, it's all the same. And you can email me, even if you feel like you learned, I can gladly help you.
As far as social media, would you recommend creating new pages for different countries? So we're primarily based in the United States, but we're looking to go to like London and Germany. Would you recommend, number one, having their own pages? And second of all, how do you grow audiences if we haven't had any contact with them? And how do we find out what they're looking for? I know that was a loaded question.
Yeah, so disclaimer is that I'm not a social expert, but I have had experience with this. So ask a real expert too. But I would absolutely create new pages, because one of the worst things you can do is when you're engaging an audience, and wherever you're based, the UK is hours ahead of us. So now you're going to be posting like in our afternoon, and it's the middle of the night for the UK, and no one's even going to see it. So you do want to have different pages. As far as growing audiences, just buy the audience. So target users on Facebook and grow it from there.
Time for one more question, folks. All right, last question. Gentleman with the green pants.
Green's best. Have you run into any kind of interesting things as you've done this, as you've gone through and basically looked at Wikipedia and things like that, where maybe you learned on the backside that it wasn't quite the way that you wanted it? I mean, I'm sure instances happen from time to time like that. Or any maybe funny stories that came from that?
Well, this example I mentioned before, as far as the right words to use in Portugal versus Brazil, like that's something I discovered because Wikipedia is language-based rather than culture-based, so you'll have multiple entries, so like they'll have all the right words for it. So that was one I learned. I think that's about it. Yeah.
That's all we have time for. Let's thank Eli.
Thank you for coming.